Okay, we are ready to go.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Darrell. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gay Jones, and I'm chair for our Cordova CPAC. Welcome, one and all. And I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we will begin with a roll call from our clerk. Thank you.
Member Garcia,
Hi there, present.
Member Haven,
Present.
Member Lineback, Member Mitchell, Member Stoll,
Present.
Member Thomas,
Here.
Member Jones.
I am here. Thank you.
And you have a quorum.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Everyone, would you please stand, and we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
And to
the republic
for
which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
All righty. Now we have introductions. As I said, my name is Gay Jones. I live in the Brecca area, the Butterfield Riviera East Community Association area, and I get to be chair, at least for tonight. So let's see. I'm the chairperson. How about Christopher, vice chair? Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, this is Chris Stahl, and I represent Gold River.
Thank you. And District 3, Jesse Garcia.
Hi there, everybody. This is Jesse Garcia. I represent the Larchmont area. Relatively new here. Glad to meet everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, District 4, Mr. Haven.
Good evening, Kurt Haven. I sleep in Gold River.
Thank you, Mr. Haven. All righty, and then we have Mr. Thomas.
Maurice Thomas, and I represent Mather.
Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. Sounds like we have a pretty good representation here tonight. I appreciate everyone making the time to be here. Madam Clerk, do you have some Cpac announcements for us?
Yes. In compliance with directives of the County, State, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this meeting is live streamed and closed to in-person public participation. Temporary procedures are subject to change pursuant to guidelines related to social distancing and minimizing person-to-person contact. To make a verbal comment at today's meeting, dial 916-875-2500 and follow the prompts to be placed in queue for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter. When the chair opens public comment for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter, callers will be transferred from the queue into the meeting to make a verbal comment. Written comments are also accepted. Send your email to boardclerk@saccounty.net, and your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record. And that concludes my announcements.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate all your help on that. Okay, let's see. I think my agenda just went away, but we're okay. Tonight is a really great opportunity here because we have planning staff presenting us with a workshop on some code updates. And I know I have a bunch of questions going through our little packet here, and I'm sure others do on the council, as well as potential public members. So let's just jump right in. The official subject is Sb2 Housing Production Streamlining and Acceleration - Amendments to the General Plan, Zoning Code, and Countrywide Design Guidelines. And this is a county-wide situation that's being presented to all the CPACs. That is my understanding. So, Madam Clerk, who do we have as staff for presentation of this item?
This is Darrell with the clerk of the board. I believe that we have Jessica Bryant on the call for the
Jessica
presentation.
Brandt is with us?
Brandt, I'm sorry.
Oh, excellent. Senior planner for the county. Jessica, good evening. How are you?
I'm good, Chair Gay. How are you?
Chair Gay's just fine. Thanks. Hey, so shall we just, unless there's some other pressing matter that I've forgotten, I would like to get into this workshop. So I hereby declare the workshop open. And Jessica Brandt, Senior Planner, please proceed.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. So, as the chair has summarized, this is one of a number of workshops that we're doing with the CPACs to review amendments that are being proposed to the general plan, the zoning code, and the countywide design guidelines to streamline and accelerate housing production. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the Sacramento County Office of Planning and Environmental Review, or PER, received grant funding called the Sb2 Grant from the state of California. The goal of this funding is to encourage the development of plans that streamline multifamily housing approvals and accelerate all types of housing production. PER staff began working on this effort by reviewing our existing zoning code, general plan, and design guideline language, wow, that was hard, related to housing. And we also looked at some feedback that had been provided by community stakeholder groups, such as the Building Industry Association and House Sacramento, that were provided during our housing element update process, which has also been taking place during this time, to kind of gather some of the sort of pinch points or issue areas that they see in our codes as far as streamlining housing. We also held a workshop with the local chapter of the American Institute of Architects to further inform the amendments, particularly the design review amendments. So after this review and initial outreach was completed, staff identified key areas for amending, which I'll be outlining for you tonight. These include amendments to the zoning code to address development standards, allowed uses and review processes related to housing developments, amendments to the zoning code related to new state mandates around density bonus programs, amendments to our multifamily design guidelines to comply with new state regulations that require objective design standards, and also to mirror and support the zoning code amendments that we're doing. And these areas are we're bringing these areas to the CPACs as not necessarily line by line language, because we really wanted to get all of this feedback before we kind of brought forward specific, if we're going to modify setbacks, do we modify them by 5 feet or 10 feet? We wanted to get a better idea of just the key areas and responses on those. So the specific language for each amendment area is still being worked out. At the end of the presentation, I'm hoping to have a discussion with the CPAC about these areas and any recommendations for specific changes or concerns you might have. And as I go through the presentation, there'll be some particular areas that we're very interested in getting some feedback on. And so I'll be sure to sort of flag those. And the idea is that we will be finishing up our CPAC Roadshow at the end of, actually it'll be first couple of weeks of June. And then I'll talk about this at the end, but we plan to come back with a workshop to the Planning Commission in late July. Next slide. So starting with the zoning code amendments, the first target area is expanding the range of housing product types that are allowed in our low density residential zones and in commercial zones. The amendments would allow specifically small duplex and multifamily products in these low density zones by right, and larger projects with a use permit. By small projects, we mean 2, 10, or fewer lots or units. With this, there would be no change in the density allowed in each zone. For example, a property that is 20,000 square feet or roughly half an acre in the RD4 zoning district, which allows 4 units per acre, would still only accommodate 2 units, whether they're 2 single-family homes each on its own lot or 1 duplex. The idea here is to provide more flexibility in design and the potential for redevelopment of underutilized properties, and then a better ability for small infill developments to recoup development costs. So the picture here is actually from a street in my neighborhood in Carmichael. And there's, I live in an older area, and we have actually a variety of housing types. And in this particular instance, the home in the center is actually a duplex, and then it's 2 single-family homes on each side. In this zoning now, this wouldn't be allowed. This is an older property, predates the current zoning. But this is kind of the thought, is that we could start allowing a little bit more of a variance in these product types.
Madam Chair?
Oh, she's on
Yes,
mute.
Mr. Haven, go ahead.
What is the protocol for questions? How does she want us to ask questions, at the end or during the presentation?
I was assuming we'd take them at the end. Jessica, Ms. Brandt,
No
do you have
problem.
any other considerations? How does that sound to you?
I'd like to save them to the end. If you think you might lose your train of thought by then, feel free to jump. At the
That's
end,
fine.
what we can do is bounce back to a certain area.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jessica, I have my notes and my highlights already, so
Okay,
I can go back.
cool. Yeah, there's
Are the other
here.
council members okay with that?
Yes.
If I don't hear any violent objections, we'll just have Jessica continue.
That sounds good.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
Okay, demerit for Haven, but that's okay. We'll continue. Thank you,
Joel,
Jessica.
can I get the next slide, please? Okay. So the second target area is multifamily residential development standards. And this is where we often hear from potential developers that specific development standards are that we have on the books are major barriers to making multifamily residential projects work, even on properties zoned for multifamily development. For example, developers often have difficulty meeting minimum density on smaller multifamily zone properties, let alone the nominal maximum density, without requesting deviations from development standards. And one of the ones that gets brought up a lot is a standard that requires a 2-story multifamily development to be set back at least 50 feet from a shared boundary with single family. And so, there's sometimes people bring up some equity issues there where you have, the ability of a single family to come in and go 5 feet from the property line and be 2 stories, but a multifamily would not have that same allowance. And so we're looking at peeling that back a bit. We're not going from 50 feet to 5, but the idea is that, trying to make it more reasonable and equitable between the different types of residential product. Other than setback, we're looking at potentially open space. Some of the open space requirements can be hard to meet. Parking, more in the transit-rich areas. Reducing parking or allowing street parking to be counted. And I will say that one has been flagged at some of the other CPAC meetings. So as a potential issue, I think there's a thought that there's an understanding that trying to get all that parking on there is tough and chews up a lot of land. But the flip side is that those cars need to go somewhere, and often people don't see it ending up in a good situation if you don't have enough parking. So that's certainly one we can talk about some more. And then landscaping, some of our landscaping requirements, for example, you're required to set back 25 feet in a front yard for multifamily and landscape. That sort of seems like dead space in a way. It's not a very usable piece of space. It'd be more usable if it was internal open space potentially. So the thought is reducing perhaps from 25 feet to 20 feet. To ensure the amendments don't go too far in areas with predominantly low density residential development, staff is proposing to create what we're calling an infill property category that would retain more restrictive standards. And we're looking at defining an infill property as a lot that is 2 gross acres or less, with at least 2 adjacent properties zoned for low density residential. And so that's something where we're trying to make the development standards less restrictive in areas that may be higher density areas, but kind of maintain kind of a medium ground when it comes to areas that are predominantly low density. So this is definitely an area that has sparked discussion, and I'd be happy to discuss this more as we end the presentation. Next slide. The third target area is the process for requesting deviations from multifamily residential development standards. Currently, any deviation from a development standard or a multifamily project requires approval of a special development permit from the Planning Commission. And this is expensive and time consuming. You're looking at a minimum of $14,000 to make the request and about 6 to 8 months. And, when you're looking at a small lot and you're trying to make an infill project work and you are having to request a deviation from that 50-foot setback, a lot of folks do the calculations and walk away. So what we're proposing to create is a new minor level special development permit, which I have called the SPAM, and no one can stop me. So it's one of the benefits of being a bureaucrat. So you can make up acronyms. So the SPAM we're looking at it as a way that you can request a limited number of deviations from multifamily residential development and from our design standards, which I'll talk about a little bit too, and for deviations from accessory dwelling unit standards. It would be set up similarly to our current minor use permit. So the decision authority would be with our planning director after an analysis by staff and a notice that goes out to properties within 300 or 500 feet and the ability for them to comment. There would not be a CPAC review at this level, but it would be an approval is a entitlement, so it is a discretionary action. It would be appealable to the Board of Zoning Appeals and subject to CEQA review. So this still is a bit of a hurdle, and it's meant to be that way. Sometimes, especially if we end up taking our development standards and loosening them, and then someone comes in for an even larger deviation, there really does need to be more of this review of does this make sense in the land use context. But this would be a much shorter timeline, lower cost option. And we are looking at kind of the extent of the reach for this level. We're thinking about either limiting the number of deviations that you could ask for at a minor level before you would have to then move up to another level of review, or the extent of the deviation requested. So, if you're requesting more than 25% deviation from a setback, for example, then, you would be bumped up. And then for anything that doesn't qualify for this minor level, the spam, then we are looking at moving those from a planning commission to a zoning administrator level. Again, just trying to chip away at the cost and the time that it takes to get these projects through. Next slide. So a fourth area of amendments is zoning code language related to density bonus programs. This area is unrelated to the other amendment areas. So I want to stress that before I kind of get into it. A lot of this is driven by state regulations, changes in the guidelines or the requirements for local governments to support and encourage more dense housing. It only pertains to multifamily residential projects that have regulatory agreements to serve certain target populations. And I'm going to pause if anyone wants me to get into what I'm talking about when I say regulatory agreements and target populations. I can get more in depth on that.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Hammond.
So basically you're talking about workforce or low-income housing on this slide number 6?
That's correct. There are some additional types of housing that can come into these density bonus programs if there's some sort of regulatory agreement in place. And so that's that first bullet there, the new project types that provide for foster youth or disabled veterans, homeless persons, and college students. And so it's expanded quite a bit as far as the different populations that could be served under one of these restricted unit sort of.
But these are typically tax credit deals.
Yeah.
These are long-term tax credit deals, state deals. So my other question was on the affordability. Are we seeing 55 years in tax credits now?
That's a good question. We should, right? If they want the affordability to last that long.
And I've been out of this industry for a couple of years, so I couldn't answer that question. So that's just something I'm asking.
No, that's an interesting question. I can follow up on that.
Most of the projects we did before were, 30 years, 35 was the longest I ever did, but 55 seems like a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think it was spurred because there were a number of projects that had come in 30 years ago and run through that affordability period and came out of it. And okay. It was like, 30 years actually went by. Now.
Well, it's just that on all the other slides, this will be the most maximum density bonus of all the projects you've talked about so far. So when you talk about an 80% max density bonus, can you explain how many units that is and how many people, and kind of just give us an example of what an 80% max density bonus means?
Yeah, so the way that this works is, so for a calculation example, if a property is zoned RD20, which is units an acre, without a density bonus, with a density bonus, depending on, let's say it's affordability restrictions, depending on the level of affordability, they would be able to develop between 27 to 36 units per acre based on state legislation. So, and that's the 36 is that 80% density bonus.
Okay.
So,
great answer. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's actually one of my colleagues put that together. So I'm totally cheating because I have a cheat. But good question.
So if you were to go to a traditional marketplace apartment complex, just pick anybody on Arden or even in Rancho, explain to everybody what the difference in density would be, because 80% is pretty high.
Yeah, so if it's just a market rate multifamily, there's no density bonus potential here.
Yeah.
It's just the 20 units an acre. We do have another program where there is a potential to do up to 15% density bonus if you're providing units for some target populations. It's called our HIP program. It's another one that I came up with the acronym. And it's the Housing Incentive Program, and that can be used for market rate, but they would have to have some restricted units, or not restricted units, targeted units. So.
Thank you, Mr. Haven. I had that checked as a question as well. So, Jessica, following up on Mr. Haven's question, the maximum density of 80%, so RD20 could move to RD36. Now, what things would come under this? We have the new project types where you have that listing. What else is already in existence that would be covered under that 80%?
It's only projects that have some sort of regulatory agreement. So it would be projects that, for instance, are working with the Sacramento Housing Redevelopment Agency, likely are receiving tax credits or bond funding or local funding. So they're very few and far between, unfortunately. But this is another way to make their projects pencil or make it work to have such a restricted income allowance. And so it's so this is a very small slice of the overall projects that would be coming through us. And I think this is more driven by there have been lots of updates to state regulations, and so we're mirroring what the state is requiring. For example, the maximum density bonus, we have to say, okay, yeah, you can go higher if you're one of these regulated type projects. There's additional concessions and waivers. They can ask for reduced setbacks, higher height, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I am still concerned about that 80%, the jump from 35 to 80%, but we can go ahead and move on. Unless there are members who have a question on this particular density bonus program. Are there any takers? And we can always revisit this at the end.
Definitely. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Brandt. Go ahead.
All right, let's hit slide 7. Okay, so this is another area where we're responding to some changes in state regulations. It is amending a portion of our countywide design guidelines. So recent state legislation has required local jurisdictions to use only objective standards when reviewing the design of multifamily residential development. And when I say objective, an example of objective versus subjective. So for subjective, it would be a fence or wall is compatible with the surrounding area. That's subjective. Who's making that decision? Why? What are you looking at? How can I tell if something's compatible or not? If you say only wrought iron fence along street frontages as a standard, that's objective. You can say, anyone looks at it and goes, that's a wrought iron fence. Okay, you're fine, you meet that standard. The county currently only has subjective guidelines, more or less. Ours are much more into the compatible, complementary, and because of these recent changes to state law, we really can't continue to do that in our review of multifamily projects. So what we are proposing is to amend the portions of the design guidelines that cover design criteria for multifamily residential projects and make them into design standards. So they would be comprised of a set of objective design standards that all multifamily would be required to follow. The design standards would be treated the same as development standards. So just like the development standards, height, setback, and whatnot that would live in the zoning code, you would, if you want to deviate from a design standard, for instance, the wrought iron fence, you would also require a special development. Most of our design standards that we're putting together are made up from existing design guidelines, kind of modifying them so that they're more of a checklist kind of standard. Things like varied treatment on facades, like wainscoting or window shutters, beefing up landscaping along interior perimeter property lines. Some new standards are being introduced. One that is different but has been in a lot of our policy documents over the years is requiring that if the development has an adjacent, like a stub street or an irrevocable offer of dedication that maybe stubs into that property, the proposed development is required to tie in to that stub street. So that, completes the circulation network and provides more of an integration into the neighborhood. That's different. We haven't had that as a standard. And I'm curious, at the end, if anyone has responses on that one. Another one we're looking at potentially is requiring parking lots to be at the side or rear of the property, especially if we're reducing front yard setbacks. This seems like a reasonable request. Again, trying to bring these projects forward to interact with the street more. Also, no perimeter walls adjacent to the right-of-way. And again, bringing these into the community as a whole. So all of these are items that we're looking at putting in these design guidelines. Again, still working, or the design standards, still working on the specific language, and I'm looking for feedback on this. And slide 8. Okay, so this is our final grab bag of proposed amendments. These are, the first two relate to dealing with homeless populations. There's again a lot driven by state law changes. Emergency shelters. We are including amendments to allow what are called low barrier navigation centers in areas where we allow emergency shelters. And just to be clear, emergency shelters are only allowed in our general commercial and light industrial, or M1 zones. This wouldn't change. The low barrier navigation center is very service heavy. So the idea is that people can come there and, get triage and help and services. And so the state wanted to make sure that those were, that locals didn't try to kind of run those out. So that was a recent state law that we're going to loop into this set of amendments. Another one is permanent supportive housing. And we're looking at adding a definition for that and being consistent with what we allow in our residential zones for permanent supportive housing. And for permanent supportive housing, you can think of group homes, residential care homes, and sort of group living or supportive living situations. And the state has really come down on that quite a bit. They want to make sure that these different types of living arrangements that do help serve some unserved populations are allowed. And so we're updating our code to make sure that we comply with that. And then finally, there were a couple of bills, Senate Bill 35 and Senate Bill 330, which required streamlining of housing development projects by limiting the number of hearings, putting in processing timelines, and then restricting the level of review. So ministerial approvals for projects that meet certain standards. So this area is, it's sort of locked down. There's not a whole lot of play here, but we did want to at least bring this out more as kind of an educational thing for why we're touching these areas at all. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, workshops are being held with each of the 14 CPACs this month and next month. Then the thought is that staff will finalize the draft amendments and schedule a workshop at the Planning Commission. We have a target of late July 2021, this July. And we hope after that workshop to go through a public hearing with the Planning Commission and then a final hearing with the board in December of this year. Because we're on grant funding, the state did put limits on how long they'll reimburse us. So we're hustling as much as we can hustle in order to get the public outreach out there and get our responses back and through the hearings in a timely manner. So with that, I think next slide. And I think that is the extent of the presentation, and I think we can kick off our discussion.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Brandt. You've covered a lot of ground tonight, and at least for initial discussion here, I appreciate all the staff work that's gone into this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a quick check-in with everyone. I can go ahead and call on our members for questions and comments. I'd prefer it to be a little bit more free flow if we can, but I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask all their questions. And then I'll be asking the clerk to see if there's anyone in the public queue that has questions or comments. So with that, let's open it up to members. Stahl, Garcia, Mr. Haven, Mr. Thomas, myself. Who has some questions?
I guess I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Jessica, great job.
Thank you.
Can you pull up slide number 3, please? There was in the bullet here, it says no change to density allowed. Can you explain that, please? I didn't catch that part.
Sure. So
it looks like you're allowing more density to me.
So that isn't the idea. So the idea is that right now in, let's say, RD4 zoning district, the only housing product that's allowed is single family residential. So you have one unit, one lot, one house, one lot, right? And and there's minimum lot sizes and whatnot. Okay. What we're proposing is that if you have a lot that's large enough where you would still have, only, if it's like I said, only a half acre, if you have a half acre and for whatever reason you wanted to do a duplex, instead of splitting it into 2 lots and having 2 single family homes, you could do that.
Okay.
If it's sort of allowing a variation in product types. And it's sort of interesting because we actually have I've seen over the years in areas like Rio Linda is one where you have people that have fairly large lots and they come in and they say, we want to do a duplex. And we're like, well, you can't, you're RD1. And they're like, what are you talking about? I have, an acre here. And we're like, well, you can split it up and that costs $14,000 and that, and they're like, this is nuts. And so it's just allowing for that sort of variation.
Okay. Slide 4, can you pull that one? I really like these standards. Just FYI, I ran some of this by some developer friends and other people that have a lot more knowledge than me. And the setbacks are something that new development always is challenged with. But my issue is I'm not sure it always works, especially in these big giant homes that you're showing a picture of, because of 2 vehicles, 3 vehicles, 20-foot driveways or 25-foot driveways, and then you're dealing with interior sidewalks, and then you got some code enforcement issues with cars blocking driveways, etc. So is this really for the picture that you show, or is it more for apartments and multifamily?
These are apartments.
Well, that's an apartment?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I
Yeah.
thought it was a house.
It's not here. I think it's down near San Diego. But yeah, they're apartments, and they are made up of, I think there's sort of like 4 units. And they're scattered amongst here.
Well, my thinking was like in Anatolia and also in West Sacramento, there are single family homes that are 20, 25 feet setback. And it really does cause a problem with the vehicles and walkability. I like the setback idea, but if there's a way to get the cars behind or somehow, away from the homes, that's just an opportunity. I really haven't seen this setback work in an urban situation.
Okay. Well, that's good feedback.
That's just one comment. And then, I'm sorry, one more, number 5. The minor special development permit, I really like this idea because what developers are looking for in project managers is certainty. So you want to be able to walk in and say, here's my plan, here's my idea, here's my concept, here's the drawings, here's how we're going to present this. What's it going to take to get it done? And this minor special development permit is really a fast track, I think, for a lot of developers to understand what their position is and then how to get it done. The only concern that I have is it probably isn't big enough. In other words, it needs to be probably covering a larger area so that there really is value to this. Am I making sense? I think you talked about expanding what you want to do with the special development permit. And probably hasn't been all thought out complete yet, but if you can expand that even larger, then there is certainty.
Yeah, no, I like that feedback. I think we really had been going back and forth. At one point, it was covering all deviations for multifamily, whatever you were asking, they would all just go through minor. Another time, it was only covering side and rear setbacks. I mean, so we've really sort of been swinging as we get different kinds of feedback. So it's
So I would challenge you to try to increase this category, maybe add as much as you can in there, because the bottom bullet says exactly what everyone needs to do right now. We need to reduce the cost and the time for housing projects. We need to get housing built in this county. There's a huge shortage. So if any way that we can bring certainty, timeliness, and a way to complete things quickly. And I like this special development permit. I just think it needs to be probably broader.
Okay.
And then my last one, sorry, on number 7, subjective to objective. This part I love. Having spent 18 years with Rancho and watching how, and with all due respect, great planners, good planners are saying, hey, I think it should be this, and the left hand, the right hand are different, the middle hand's different. Everybody has their own objectivity. To be able to walk in with a standards book or a standards, background that says this is, a developer can go online, look at it and say, this is what we're looking for. If you bring us this, we can get this approved in a short period of time, and this is what it's going to cost you. This is the future of planning. And I really, really think this needs to be broadened also, so that when you have a project manager or developer that comes in, They know exactly what you're looking for. You don't have to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think this is awesome. I think this is going to make a big difference in bringing quality projects to the county.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Haven. I appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any? What other members have other questions or comments, please? Don't be shy.
I have a couple questions.
Yes,
So let me see. In regards to the parking, has it ever I guess has the environmental pressures come into play as far as with parking, if that makes sense? Because I from what I understand, a lot of groups that are trying to reduce the amount of parking, so we can meet a lot of the state, requirements as far as with emissions. So has that been part of the discussion when we're talking about, reducing parking?
Yes, there's definitely a push, like you say, at the state level, to reduce the parking burden for residential projects. I think part of it is, trying to move the needle on people using transit or alternative methods of transportation in order to get at some of that climate change issue. For instance, for the work that I've done on accessory dwelling units, the state passed some rules where we can't require parking for those. I think that is part of the idea, is that you're trying to build that that demand for transit in a way. I think for a lot of the developers who tag this as an item that they would like to see reduced, it's more related to just the space that the parking spaces eat up, and sort of pointing to there are transit, there is transit availability, and we want people to just go ahead and take that or use the street or whatever. So it has been part of the conversation, a little bit of the driver, and I think really the state is probably going to continue to require us to reduce the number of parking spaces that we require. So, part of what we're doing here is sort of preemptory, thinking that that's probably where the direction is going to go anyway.
Okay, yeah, I know there's a big pressure to do so. Okay, and then as far as with, can you go back to slide 8, please? Okay, so permanent supportive housing. What does that look like again? I kind of have a general idea of that, and I remember you saying something along the lines of it's not. I mean, it's kind of already set in stone, but what does that look like as far as with permanent supportive housing?
So, was someone going to talk?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. So permanent supportive housing is, you can kind of think of it as like a group home, or like a recovery residence, is one of the examples that we use. So right now, the state requires locals to allow or to consider a residence where people are receiving services that people who are considered to have some sort of disability, if they're receiving some sort of service or support in a housing environment, that has to be considered the same as a single family residential unit, and not be subject to any additional use regulations or standards. And we have a lot of these actually all through the county, and you may have some in your neighborhood and not have any idea that they're there. Usually, under our current standards, you can only have 6 people receiving services, and they do have to live there for at least a month. So permanent is, it's a bit of a flexible term. I think the state looks at anything where someone's getting at least a month, if not more, of service at a site to be permanent. And so it's recovery residences, it's residential care homes for the elderly, residential care homes for adults who can't care for themselves, foster homes, and the like. There is a push, although I don't think it's passed at the state level, to require us to consider homes that care for up to, I think it's 14 people, or just go for like 2 people per bedroom, and require those to be considered the same as like a family residence. So that may come up in a little while, but that's usually when they say permanent supportive housing, it's that people are living there, they're getting their meals, they're getting some sort of service, either medical or like in the recovery residences, they have their meetings and take them to counseling sessions and the like.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that would be I think that's a great idea, especially with the 2 per bedroom, because it just seems like the housing situation actually kind of in crisis mode.
Yeah.
So I think it's an excellent idea.
Yeah, and there's a lot of use of this permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of organizations in Sacramento County that will rent homes and bring folks to those homes and do the supportive housing there. And that's, I think the concern at the state side is that people may, try to regulate these differently than a family home and restrict where they can go. And so, they're passing laws saying, no, you have to just consider those just like a family living in that home, as long as they're providing some of this support for the folks that are living there.
Well, I think it's important too, Jessica. These things already exist. There's hundreds of them in the county, and what you're doing is you're just put it into your planning documents so that it's actually identified. It's what you're doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they're already out there. There's probably 1,000 of them out there in the county.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's an occasional bad actor, and
Sure.
And that's sort of the one that triggers everyone. Oh my God, these are terrible. But yeah, you probably have one on your street. You have no idea.
That's true.
Jessica, what you just brought up is an interesting question, because when let's say all this slide 8 comes to pass, who is responsible to take care of the bad actor?
Oh, that's a fun one. So it depends. Different supportive housing, some of them are licensed by the state and some aren't. And that could be a whole nother workshop with you. The ones that are licensed with the state, then the state is responsible for making sure that they're meeting the criteria for operating. For example, a residential care home, they have to have certain, they have to meet building standards, fire code, they have to provide certain services and the like. Others are in kind of a gray zone. So some of these recovery residences, no one really, there's no license requirement at the state, at least not yet, although they're working on it. Really, when it comes to bad apples with something like that, then it becomes like a code enforcement issue and more on the nuisance side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, my point is that when we add the definition here, we need to allow some type of, what would be the word? We need to insert language about oversight. That would be my recommendation when we're talking about adding a definition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that would be, I think that'd be very important. Go ahead, Maurice, if you have, or Mr. Thomas, if you have other questions.
Those were the only questions I had. I guess as far as with the comments, I really like the work that everyone is doing here. It looks like it's trying to find creative ways to increase housing. Whether it's for building, resale, supportive housing or anything of that nature. Housing is definitely needed, and I definitely want to communicate that. But whenever it's time for you to ask us questions to receive additional information, I definitely give my input.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Okay, Mr. Garcia or Mr. Stahl, are you sitting on any hot burning questions? Please go ahead.
Hi there. Oh, do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't really have a question. This is Jesse Garcia. I just want to voice my support. I saw this on the agenda, and I definitely put a smile on my face. This is something that I think is needed, and just want to voice my support. But I did have a question. So you might have mentioned it in the beginning, and I'm sorry I'm not behind my computer looking at the slideshow. But are the improvements or the changes that you're making to the plan or to the general plan, from what I understand, is it mandated by the state, or is this something that the county saw was needed and that's why they applied for the grant? Or are we kind of do we have to meet a certain target for housing and things like that?
That's a good question. These always have been areas where we've sort of had our eye on trying to tweak them. I think with the push on housing at the state level, it did free up some grant money. It produced grant money, and so we didn't have to do these changes, especially the ones related to like the product type, expanding where products can be, touching on the design guidelines and the development standards. Those are all things that we did apply for the grant, and we focused on saying, this is why we think we should get this grant money. Here's our plan. Here's what we want to look at. Here's how we think this will be, helpful to streamlining housing. And then the state, granted us the money. And then as, part of this, a lot of these other changes that we were talking about, the density bonus and emergency shelters, those are all basically just taking what the state's saying we have to do and bringing them into the code. So it's sort of partially us trying to, be more proactive and work out some updates to our codes that help streamline, and then also kind of cleaning ourselves up and keeping us in step with the state generally. I think you had another question in there I haven't answered.
No. That pretty much answered it. But I do actually have a follow-up question. There were some objective standards that have been discussed. So I know if we move from subjective to objective, and my question is, what do you guys think the process would be for that? Like, who would define those standards, and would they be open to revisitation, say if it's not working and it's still becoming an impediment to development or to projects? That might be too in the weeds, but I don't know if you guys have gotten that far.
Yeah, we've talked about it. I don't think we've put anything into draft text yet as far as like the process. Right now, if a project comes through that is multifamily, if it's either non-discretionary or discretionary, which means it either has to go through a hearing process or it doesn't. It could just kind of go through an administrative review. Both of those require a design review, and it all goes through our design review administrator and then design review advisory committee. I can see it staying the same. So if a project, is coming in, it would still go through our design review administrator or committee. But with the objective standards, I think the difference will be it's not going to be as much back and forth as it has been. So, less of the applicant comes and says, "What do you guys think of this?" And one of our advisory committee members go, "It's a little too yellow," and then another one goes, "Well, I don't think that Spanish style works in the context of the area." And look at this stuff, try it again, and then they leave, and then they come back again, and then they do the same thing. I think it will be a lot cleaner going through that, but I do think it still will be through our design review advisory committee, but hopefully more streamlined.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like a quick follow-up on Mr. Garcia's comment. I think it is very important to have some participation in this moving or definition of what objective standards would be. It would be very informative for all the different communities. So I would very much like to see whether it's a workshop or comment period about this kind of stuff, because that's kind of in the weeds in a way, but that's what gets folks either their ire up or their emotions up. So I think it's very important to get that right. So hey, thanks, Jesse, for bringing that up.
Yeah, just a real quick follow-up to your follow-up. We will be notifying all the CPACs about the workshop date, and the bringing more definition to the workshop and kind of having a whole module on that with the design standards is a really good idea. I think we've asked a consultant to put together more examples of some of these product types in different situations. And we're also going to heavily rely on that to kind of give more of an idea of how this stuff would work in real life too. So yeah, that's definitely, it'll be a big workshop. I don't know if the Planning Commission has any idea. But. Okay.
Mr. Stahl, I think you're up.
I have no comment at this time.
Oh, all right. Well, I didn't mean to push you. I thought you had something else, and you let someone else go ahead. So, if you change your mind, just pop up. Hey, I have kind of a lot of questions that maybe it's to be decided type of answers. But for example, when all this stuff happens, is there going to be some kind of retroactivity on this? Or things in the pipe have to go with what's now? When's the start? If and when all this stuff gets done, what would be a start date?
So usually when we make amendments to our zoning code, if a project's in our pipeline, they can either remain with the standards that they came in with, or they can utilize the new standards. And so it wouldn't be automatically retroactive. Also, these would not apply to existing developments, so no one is going to go out and say, okay, now you don't meet the standard, you need to add this landscaping or something like that. That's yeah, definitely not going forward basis.
Please, I beg your pardon for my lack of knowledge here. When you say in the pipeline, what is the drop dead spot in this pipeline where a particular project continues with the old as opposed to the new? Is it a subdivision approval map? And what is the point where there's a point of no return where you have to continue with existing standards?
So as there isn't, I don't think we have one regulatorily except in certain situations. As a general rule, we follow that if a project has been submitted and we've deemed the application package complete, then we review based on the standards that were there at that time. We told them they were good and they were good to move forward. They're sort of now invested, and so that's the general rule for that. And in some cases, there are some regulatory requirements, some
Mm-hmm.
thing, streamlining sort of things where if someone gets in and they get considered a complete application, then there's also some rules about fees and other sorts of things too.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. That if once if an application's been deemed complete and accepted, then that's kind of the finish line for or the that's the fork in the road. You can't can't go back. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
It was a general type of question. Thanks. Could you please give us an example of a deviation of a ADU?
Yes.
That's pretty deviated as it is to get an ADU, and I'm just curious what more deviations can you have?
So the two that we get the most are going from the 1,000 square feet that's currently allowed by right to 1,200 square feet. People will actually pay big money to go those extra 200 square feet. And the other one is a 2-story development. So the accessory dwelling unit itself isn't 2 stories, but it's on top of a garage. A lot of people like building them that way. And we don't allow that, right?
I'm sorry, I cut you off. What was the last thing? That is allowed or not allowed?
It's not.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for those examples. I appreciate it. I do have some questions on the summary that was sent to us, and it's more a question of like kind of a numbers game. So we don't, not game, but a number. So we don't have if the numbers haven't been decided, that's okay. But I want to make sure that the CPACs are involved in the decision or back for whatever the final number might be. So well, gosh, there's no pagination on this.
I'm sorry.
Let's see. It's the second page of the CPAC summary. It's under summary of key amendments. It says RD5 through RD10 zoning districts would open to multifamily residential products as well. So is there more than duplexes?
Yes. So that's the same as what I was describing with the duplex on a half-acre lot. If you in an RD10, an RD10 zone property, and you wanted to do, and you had, I don't know, a fifth of an acre. No, half an acre. Right now for RD10, you could either chop it up and do single family or chop it in two and do 2 duplexes. Now you could take that parcel, leave it, and do like a 4-plex. So that's opening it up. Yeah.
What's under one roof? Again, not increasing density as was stated in another spot. Okay, thanks. And when you talk about reducing multifamily front side, street, interior side, rear setbacks, as well as, what are you thinking of? Moving from what exists now to what?
So what we have right now. So it seems that, like, for setbacks, for
one
for instance, for non-infill properties, so just a regular property that's a multifamily, development, the interior side would go from, 15 feet for a 2-story to 10 feet. And then
is that the total distance between the two walls, or is that to the fence line?
That's to the fence line. So it would be 10 feet to the fence line. So it would go from 15 to 10. And then if you're 3-story or more, you would be from, instead of a 20-foot you'd be 15.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have a perspective on that in terms of
Yeah,
what were the
we're
numbers.
sort of think of it more as nibbling than like taking a huge bite.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you. And Jessica, if you need to take a minute or a break here, I can't. You're doing this all by yourself, and I'm sorry there's no one else that you can tag team with to help
Oh, it's okay.
go back and forth. I apologize that you're getting the whole shebang here. Sorry about that. Okay, the multifamily setback for single-family residential, and is that basically the front yard and the driveway that we're talking about there?
So that's the more of the side and the rear where, like I was talking about that 50-foot setback we have on the books now, that would change. So that's the change, because right now, if you're next to a single family residence, you have that huge setback. And what we're thinking of is doing that infill property. So if you're next to a residentially zoned, a couple of residentially zoned properties, then for instance, instead of the 10-foot side yard that we would be proposing for just a regular site, if you have a site that's next to single family, it would be a 15-foot, or actually we're looking at a 25-foot setback.
Is that for
a 3-story?
For a 3-story, yeah. Okay.
For 2 or 3-story.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, there's been bonuses. Anyway, that's another particular story. All right, let me just kind of go. Now, this open space requirement is a bit bothersome. What open space requirements, small scale multifamily development, 4 units or fewer, waiving the requirement for private open space. What are the numbers? What's required now and what's being proposed?
So right now, private open space is required at it's not much. It's 40 square feet. What we found was that a lot of these small projects, like a fourplex, they build them so that they have like a backyard. And then there's some either they split it or they share it. And having that plus the requirement to put in like balconies if you have an upper unit, it's just one more thing that developers have noted as, well, if we have this other, green space over here, why do they need a 40 square foot, patio or something like that?
Well, where's the compensation for it then? That's not listed here.
There isn't. It would go away. So they would not have private open space.
Okay, well, I think that needs a complementary
like more
discussion about, well, where is the open space?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get to some, you asked a question a while ago, and I'm going to circle back to that item in a second. Well, the parking requirements, I cannot disagree with the comments that other folks have made that, for 25 years, I've heard all this stuff and we still have more and more cars. So I don't know that reduction in parking is that's it. I don't know that that's the last 25 years that has not encouraged more participation on light rail or bus routes that perhaps don't even exist. So I think that's a very critical item to be discussed in terms of quality of life. The housing situation, now it can change in the next 10 years, maybe the next 5, but you could have, 3 to 4 adults and or family with 2 or 3 grown children, everybody working, you got 5 cars.
Yeah.
We need to do a balance between the de jure and the de facto in these parking requirements. We have to distinguish between what would be ideal and then what the real facts are, literally in the street, which are all the cars. I wanted to express that very real concern I have on that one. Okay, I can skip some of the stuff. Hang on, please. When you talked about minor special development permit, entitlement, et cetera, and the step down in hearing authority for multifamily development deviation requests, it says that surrounding property owners and residents would receive notice and opportunity to comment on proposed deviations, but there would not be a Cpac review. The planning director would be the hearing authority. It's not so much even the Cpac, but there needs to be a bit more formal situation here where all the concerned property owners and residents can come together in some public forum, whether it's an advertised meeting or whatever, with the planning director, something that takes the place. If you're going to not have this be a Cpac review, there still needs to be a public forum space where the folks who are impacted can have an opportunity to talk with the planning director, not in a one-on-one, but like in a group setting where it's a public meeting and notes are taken. I think that would be very, very important. Well, I have more even on just that paragraph. Let's just keep going here. It says under general plan, changes to key policies such as LU5, and then quotation marks, establishes minimum density requirements to ensure sites are developed in an alignment with their zoning district. I'm not sure what's changing there. Could you just, if that's too in the weeds, I can take the answer offline, but I don't understand what is changing there.
Yeah, the general plan contains some policies, and when we looked through it, that are a bit counterproductive to encouraging streamlined housing and different housing product types in the various zones. That one, it's not. There's a minimum requirement, but there's also some language that allows. There's like a minimum density requirement, so it's a 75% density, but it only kicks in when you hit 10 units or more in your project. And so we have a lot of folks that come in and they're in some of, like, for instance, these RD20 zone properties, and they'll do a 9-unit project. And so that policy doesn't kick in, and we lose that ability to build out that site at the density that it was meant to build at, or was expected to build at.
So this keeps, it keeps it from being lowballed, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're removing that 10 units or more, and it's I think I'd have to pull the specific language up, but that's the general idea, is that there were some other general plan policies that were in areas that are low density, we shall maintain the low density forever kind of stuff. And it's hard to make an argument of building out what even is a zoned multifamily parcel if people can point to a policy and say, hey, everything else around here is low density, we shouldn't have this here.
Okay, thank you for that. And I appreciate everyone bearing with me. I have two other points here. Towards the end, under other SB2 related changes, it discusses that's where they discuss the maximum of 35% to 80% in certain instances for the density bonus business. And it says, the next phrase is, there is no density cap when located in a highly urbanized areas close to mass transit. What is the state's definition of highly urbanized?
I don't know. I would have to get back to you on that one.
I would really appreciate it if you would get back to, or send it to the clerk. Perhaps she could send it to all of us, because I think a lot of stuff's going to turn on some of these definitions and the numbers that haven't been decided yet. So that's very important.
Okay.
And wrapping up here, one of your questions was about stubs to through streets. And I definitely changing the stubs into through streets so we have circulation is actually one of the 3 development guidelines that my community association established over 20 years ago. And that concerned we needed to have connectivity within the community. Because if you keep things literally walled off because you didn't put the street through, that creates barriers and, in a sense, mini ghettos, so people do not feel connected. So as a CPAC member, and to reiterate, my community associations, one of our guidelines is to have connectivity within the community. So I think that is very important. I would like to have some more ideas about one of our other guidelines was to blend with the community. And that kind of comes back to the subjective versus objective design standards. So that's why I'm particularly interested in that. And just for the good of the order, the third item was that there should be appropriate dedicated park land, not in lieu fees, but dedicated park land within developments for the future residences. Anyway, yeah, put those stubs all the way through. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone in the public queue for comments or questions?
We do not have any verbal public comment or any written comment for item number 1.
Wow. Okay. Hey, you wore us out, Jessica. Do any of my fellow members have any Do any of my fellow members have any questions or comments they'd like to make in relation to item number 1? Okay. Per the clerk, we have no public comment on the workshop. Someone there? Okay. So item number 1 is closed. Thank you very much, Ms. Brandt. We appreciate all those efforts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all the good feedback.
Yeah, great job.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, we have a few other items, 4 to be exact. Under miscellaneous matters, item number 2 on the agenda, annual election of officers. I'd be glad to nominate anybody to fill any of these spots. Any thought?
What spots are available?
It's the that we're voting for the chair and the vice chair.
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Garcia, I think that sounds like a self-nomination for one of those. What would you like to do?
That was Chris, actually.
Oh, Chris.
Oh.
Chris, I'm sorry. Chris. Mr. Stahl, I'm sorry.
Maybe later.
I would go for vice chair.
To continue in your present position?
Correct.
Okay. I'll make a motion that Chris Stahl continues as vice chair. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can we do this? What's the word? Can we do
The roll
this
call vote?
verbally?
Yes, I can. And I'm sorry, that second was that member Haven or Thomas?
Thomas can take it.
Okay, I'll take
All
it.
right, so we got the second there. All right. So roll call vote, member Garcia.
Hi there. Yes.
Member Haven.
Yes.
Member Lineback. Member Mitchell. Member Stoll? Member Stoll? Member Thomas? Member Jones?
Aye.
Member Stoll?
Yes.
And your motion carries.
Mm-hmm.
And now we just have the chair left.
And my feelings will not be hurt if someone else would like to do this. We all put in a big level of review, time, and consideration for this. So, as far as I'm concerned, the chair can be open to anybody.
No one else wants it. I'd like to nominate Gay.
Are we sure no one else wants this?
All hail the Queen, Chairperson Gay Jones.
Oh my God! All I can think of is the crazy queen in that Alice in Wonderland story. Man, come on! I'm gonna take offense.
I'm sorry, and that motion was that Member Garcia?
That was from Court Jester Kurt Haven.
So we have a motion by Member Haven, and do we have a second?
I'll second that. This is Garcia.
Garcia, perfect. And I will do the roll call vote. Member Garcia?
Aye.
Member Haven?
Aye.
Member Linebeck? Member Mitchell? Member Stoll?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
And Member Jones?
Aye.
And that motion carries. All hail the Queen.
Oh, now you hush now. But seriously, folks, it would be, at least for the next time, please seriously consider let's doing some rotation in this. You know, I'm fine with this. We're all committed to our communities and our area and our Cordova community. But just for form's sake, it wouldn't be bad to change it up every now and then, folks. Point of information or point of order here. Madam Chair, I had been texting some of our members who were absent, and apparently an email was sent on Tuesday from member Carmen Mitchell.
Yes, we did receive that.
And I didn't know about that, so that would be considered an excused absence.
Oh, yes. I apologize about that. We did receive that email.
Okay, good. I didn't see it, so I was harassing her to get to the meeting. So.
Oh, okay. My apologies. I said her name for the purposes of the meeting for the record.
Right.
So I apologize. You weren't notified that she wasn't going to be coming tonight.
Well, I'm not really worried about it. I just wanted to make sure that she had the excuse. Okay, number 3, staff update.
This is Jessica Brandt again. I don't have any staff updates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Number 4, council member comments. The crickets are pretty loud around here, guys. Come on.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Haven.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Can I ask Jessica one more question off the record, kind of, sort of?
I think this is a workshop, and we can ask whatever we'd like within courtesy bounds.
All hail the Queen.
Hush!
Jessica, I was wondering if you could just quickly list the outreach that you're doing to the building community.
So like I had mentioned earlier, we've really been looking more at the feedback received from the Building Industry Association.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions or recommendations? Because we were going to try to do some more outreach in preparation of the workshop, a little more broad of a scope.
I could do some outreach and then just email you. I'm sure it's the same players that you deal with. I just want to. This really needs a lot of outreach. I mean, I think
Hmm.
this is a very positive thing for the county, and it needs to have a lot of outreach to the developers.
Yeah, yeah. If you could do that and send me an email,
Okay.
that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Are there any other council members' comments?
I guess maybe for Jessica, do you think it would be beneficial to reach out to the Sacramento Association of Realtors?
Yeah, I ended up attending a realtors event a few weeks back that was related to tiny homes. It wasn't exactly the same, but I ended up connecting with a couple of folks there, and they were very interested. So just individually, so yeah, reaching out to the organization itself, that's a very good idea.
I could connect you with Erin Teague, and she's the GAD, so you could talk to either the government relations or you could talk to the board.
Yeah.
So I can make that connection for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Are there any other council members that have additional comments? If not, we will move. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I decided to ask it. Hey, Jessica, this is Member Garcia here. I was just in your personal opinion or professional opinion, do you think that the changes and the updates that are going to be made, do you think that's going to like spur a lot of increase the development by a significant amount, or do you think, we got a lot more work still to do, or
I cannot.
what do you think?
Both. On the one hand, I think these sorts of regulatory changes are an important piece of kind of breaking loose some of especially the smaller infill development that we see just getting stopped up time and time again by the entitlement fees and process and the uncertainty, and then the standards that some of them date from the 1950s and have never really been reviewed. So I do see this as it will be a big step. I do. Another CPAC asked about building in a report back a year or two after, if this all goes through and gets on the books, whether we do see an increase in production. And so we're looking at doing something like that because I'm curious too. I do think it'll make a change. I just don't know the extent. I think the other drivers that we have less control over are still such a huge factor that the regulatory changes can only still remain just a piece. The cost of building in California, not just because of regulatory fees, but the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of land, and then just the the standards, energy efficiency standards. Now everyone needs solar panels. There's a lot of wastewater management. It just kind of goes on and on. And then, impact fees and the like, which the state is kind of chipping away at too, for better or for worse. So I'm hopeful that this will at least help in this arena. But yeah, there still are lots and lots of things that push against a lot of development.
Thank you for that.
Jessica, isn't it true that a lot of this has already been asked for by the building industries and basically we're just making it happen?
Who cares? Who cares?
Put
it in an email.
What's that?
Someone needs to mute their back conversation, please. But please repeat, Kurt.
No, I just made a comment. I agree that these changes are going to help, but a lot of this has already been asked for by the building industry. Some of it's in place in other jurisdictions, other counties. This is all positive, but when you develop, the first thing you got to have is land, and it has to pencil. You have to have the financing. There has to be a market. What I'm learning and being in the private world is, the government part of it's really the smallest piece. Like you said, Jessica, earlier, it has to work.
Mm-hmm.
The project has to function, and you're right. And what we're doing here is just adding certainty to a process that has a lot of uncertainties in it.
Yeah.
And we need to speed this process up so we can have housing. But a lot of it has to do with just where's the existing opportunities? Where's their land? Where's their infill opportunity? Things like that. So you're right. Government can help assist, but they don't drive this thing. The private market drives it.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you for that, Kurt. Exactly. Interest rates. Hey, look at availability of construction materials. And we're kind of in a squeeze position here for the next year or maybe more on the global level, and of course that impacts the United States as well, and then of course California. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Are there any other member comments? Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments?
We do not have any off-agenda public comments at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I would like to again give my appreciation to Jessica Brandt, our senior planner, for presenting us with this workshop and entertaining all our questions and comments. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for assisting with all the Blue Jean technical aspect, as well as moving the meeting forward and keeping us on track. Well, without further ado, I will wish everyone well. Have a good evening. Until our next meeting, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.